So I played the Origami King, and it's pretty good. The visuals are wonderful. I was initially against the sprite-based style for character models, because I love the paper puppet designs of the models. It allowed for more fluid movements, but I realized that it actually lets them be way more creative and loose with the poses they can do, so it's actually an improvement more than anything. There's a lot of fun little moments in this game where Mario's dancing or doing some stupid shit that you couldn't really do with the original designs. The Origami designs are cute too. I'm surprised it lets them get away with using the same basic enemies for the whole game, as you get to see them in a unique style. It's bright and colorful, and a lot of fun visual gags are around to give you a good chuckle. The only problem with the art is the inconsistency of the world. What I mean by that is that not everything is made of paper. Most of it is, but there's certain environments and effects that are just like basic Unity looking stuff that doesn't fit in. There's a bunch of bosses in the game that aren't paper either. Sure, they are adjacent to paper, but they lack any sort of trait or personality to the designs for me to even consider them characters. They're just objects. It's weird. They should be like living origami beings that represent the tools they are. It would be so much cooler. The writing is once again top notch, just a straight jump up on what Color Splash was doing, with a lot of good gags and silly characters, but also some actual emotional moments, including like a really sad conclusion for a side character. Kinda came out of nowhere. I'm not gonna spoil it, but like, some shit happens in this game. Like, some fucking serious shit. I don't know where the fuck that came from. The only problem is that not every side character is as strong. The Toad in Chapter 3 has some interesting stuff to say, but as a character he's pretty weak. He's just kind of an exposition machine, really. And the Toad in Chapter 4 is fucking trash. Like, he barely speaks, and is mostly around for his gimmick. It's not very interesting. You barely even get to see him for most of the chapter. He barely counts as a partner at all. Olivia is probably the second best support character these games have ever had. Just under Tippy, who had a little more going on with her plot. And her head. Olivia's kind of silly. But, yeah, she's fun, it's charming. Good Bowser representation. It's been so long since Super. I miss him. Although he's only in the game for a short time, sadly. But he's good. Like, I'm glad to see him actually be a character, you know? The villain's okay. Not much to say. I mean, he's pretty standard, but it's pretty funny that his motive is just that he's super racist. Oh, and Luigi's in here. Unfortunately, his presence is mostly just a long-running jerk, so there's not much else to say. It's a shame, really. The combat system is unique, and a lot more engaging than the sticker system. It's a genuine improvement for sure, but it's still very flawed. It lacks versatility. The only aspect you have to focus on is lining up the enemies. There's no further strategy. With how many different enemies are in the game, you would think they would interact with the system in many ways, but they don't. Most are just stagnant. The only major difference being the health they have and the attack patterns requiring different timings to block. There should be more. What if some characters could move while you were shifting? What if some characters could not be paired up with specific enemies? What if some could only be moved with one of the two shifting options? Stuff like that. Stuff to make you actually plan out your movements instead of just going wild with the shifting until you guess it or you can immediately see the positions they need to be. What sucks even more is that part 2 of the combat is completely brain dead. There's 3 parts to every fight. Part 1 is lining up your enemies. Part 2 is the attack phase, and Part 3 is the defense phase. The problem is that the lineup phase is the only part you have to actually worry about. In the attack phase, you have 3 options: jump, hammer, and items. Jump is for enemies grouped up in a straight line, and hammer is for enemies grouped in squares. These two work exactly the same way they've worked for the last 20 years, which is fine for the default, but there is only the default. Your options for these are just stronger versions of the same move, which you should always be using to guarantee the one-shot kill on all enemies. It's stupid. The only weakness these moves have are hammer can't hit airborne opponents, so just jump on them. And jumping is weak to enemies with hazards on their heads, which is completely negated by the iron boots you can grab immediately that do more damage than your normal jump already. So you're always going to be using the iron boots. The counter to this in-game is that every special version of the boots and the hammer have a durability. You have to keep buying them if you want to keep using them. But there's too many ways to counter that. 1, you make so much money from beating enemies you can buy 5 for every 1 gear you break. And 2, the game just gives you them for free constantly from the item boxes. And then there's the other items. You got mushrooms, fire and ice flowers, power blocks, and tanuki tail. My question for all these items, what's the point? The flowers are the same as jumping, and the tail is the same as the hammer. I think. The only difference is you can only use them once. There's no purpose for these items. Okay, the flower gets 2 points, actually. In boss fights, you can use them at any range to hit the boss. This is basically an emergency damage chip if you fuck up and land on an attack space too early. And the other thing is that the 2 types have strengths and weaknesses against certain characters. But that really only matters for some bosses, because you one-shot all the enemies with jump and hammer anyway. The power block's the only useful item. It stuns all enemies on the board. Makes sense that you can only carry 3 at a time. Again, what's the point? None of these items have enough impact for you to ever want to use them over your jump and hammer. They're not even stronger or anything. Why do you have access to equipment designed to one-shot enemies at all times? Why do they even have health? Why do you need money? It just goes in a cycle towards your next fights, and you end up with too much of it to even care anymore. None of these mechanics actually have any meaning or depth to care about. It's the exact same problems as Sticker Star and Color Splash. I thought the lesson would have been learned, but nothing's changed. Why fight at all? Is the puzzle solving really that engaging? Even though you solve every single puzzle the same way with no new challenges? The fucking partners don't even engage with the combat. All they do is attack once after each turn without your input. It's entirely random if they'll hit or miss. The boss fights are frustrating because they can actually be hard, which should be a good thing, but I found myself not enjoying the boss fights. Then I realized the reason why is because the rest of the game is too easy. It makes the boss fights frustrating because it makes you feel like you're stupid in a game that is 90% of the time a cakewalk. The sheer lack of effort in a part of the game that you spend literally half your playtime on is appalling. This really sucks because the other half of the game is good. The environments are really engaging. I like all the little puzzles you're solving for the collectible turds. Yes, turds are literally collectibles in this game. It's actually kind of funny. Your health is actually important in the overworld too, because there are real ass obstacles, platforming, and even a whole different form of combat that's actually kind of challenging and fun. These paper mache fights are cool. I wish there was more of them. There's also special events that pique my interest, like this really cool quiz game that utilizes the puzzle board mechanic in a really fun way. I wish it was more of this. Who cares about the fighting anymore? Like, you could just scrap the whole combat system of the game and just add more actual puzzles and special events for the chapters. It would flesh out the game way better than the fighting. It's clearly what the developers have more interest in, I think. Okay, it's not all perfect though. Let's bring up some more complaints. Chapter 3 and 4 are really weak compared to the rest of the game. Chapter 3 goes for a more open world approach with small hotspots of activities to investigate, while overall the place is pretty empty. I don't like this idea. I want a level. Too much of this level is spent traveling and digging in the right spots. It's boring. The town's pretty cool. I wish I could have spent more time with the town and helping the sniffets out. They're fun. Then it hits you with 2 dungeons back to back and you're done. It's very lackluster. And again, the partner doesn't really make up for it. Also, the world itself isn't very interesting. It's just desert. Pretty boring. Chapter 4 is worse because it's the same. It's literally the exact same structure of 3 to a T. The only differences are that you're in the ocean instead of the desert, and there's no fun town in the middle to chill in. Your partner's worse. He has the same digging mechanic, but it takes way longer to do. It's just so shitty that these are back to back with no breaks. It feels like the Peach ship intermission should have been here, but it couldn't because of plot reasons. It's just a half-assed chapter. I wanted to be clear that despite all the thinking I had on this game after beating it, I still think it's at least an improvement. I could even call this one a good game if you can ignore the major flaws. Half of this game is a step in the right direction towards what made this franchise so good in the first place. And it still needs work in originality and consistency, but what we have here is more positive than negative. The other half, however, is more or less unchanged from the biggest problems this franchise has nosedived into. This series has such an irritating struggle with its identity. For me, and many other fans, we have a pretty clear vision of what this series is supposed to be, but it's just not gonna happen. I'm not even gonna try and ask for it anymore, I'm tired of it. Whatever this series wants to be, I'm there for it as long as it gets to live on, unlike certain other series. But it needs to actually be good. Please. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. Well, I hope you guys liked my first attempt at doing a proper review. I hope I can do some more for you. See ya!